Hello, everyone, and welcome to Novara Live. My name is Dalia Gebrial, and joining me today is the most handsome man at Novara Media, Mr. Stephen Methven. How are you doing, Stephen?
Hey, Dalia. Thank you very much for that. Obviously, you need your specs adjusting. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm all right. It's been a bit of a wild few days from, hot assassins to huge shifts in the Middle East, and we're going to be covering that all today. So the stories that we're going to be touching on today are the latest developments from Syria and Gaza. In the US, we have swarms of drones above New Jersey. We're going to be figuring out what that's all about. And we're going to be dissecting the media's coverage of the UHC shooter. So make sure you stay tuned for all of that. But before we get started, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who signed up as a monthly supporter of Novara Media this past week. Your support truly means the world to us. And as you know, Novara Media is entirely funded by our incredible community of supporters. Without you, we just couldn't bring you this show every weeknight. So thank you so much for making this possible. And it's one thing for us to tell you how invaluable your support is, but let's hear directly from those who back Novara Media and find out why they choose to support us. So, one supporter said, "I watched lots of your content and it only feels right to support." It only is right to support. And because if more people got their info from Novara Media, the world would be a more equal, less violent place. That's a version of the future that I think it's important for us to invest in. So you don't have to take our word for it. You can take it from the word of the people who have already made the decision to support us. And if you agree with them, if you enjoy the content that we provide on Novara Live, and you yourself want to become part of the supporter community and you believe that it's worth supporting independent media, please consider becoming a monthly supporter and donating 1 hour's wage or whatever you can afford today. Next year, we want to make an even bigger impact, which is only possible with your support. So make sure you visit novaramedia.com/support or follow the link in the description to join our community of supporters today. Syria's new administration has begun laying out its vision for the country's future. And one of the first pledges to emerge from the HTS-led interim government is the introduction of a free market economy. Bassel Hamwi, who heads the biggest business lobby in Syria, told Reuters of the plan to neoliberalize the country's economy just days after the shock overthrow of Assad's regime. The move is being widely understood as an attempt to reassure the global business community that Syria's new government will protect private property and integrate Syria into the global financial status quo. Now, Syria's economy has historically been state-owned and controlled by a small minority of Assad loyalists. So strict controls were imposed on imports and exports, with independent trading in foreign currencies being a jailable offense. So this is the latest attempt by HTS to situate themselves as a legitimate mainstream geopolitical player in the eyes of the West, shedding the historic associations of its leader, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, with organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. In February 2021, for example, al-Julani reassured US media outlet PBS that his party, quote, does not represent a threat to the security of Europe and America. The West has, in response, been quick to legitimize these emerging actors. Officials from both the UN Security Council and the UK government, for example, have indicated that the HTS may be delisted as a terrorist organization, paving the way for their official recognition in diplomatic processes. As part of this legitimization process, HTS have pledged to protect minorities such as Syrian Kurds, although this is strongly denied by Kurdish organizations who point to the fact that hundreds of thousands of Kurds have been displaced following threats of violence. Human Rights Watch described the situation as follows. On November 27th, a coalition of armed terrorist groups, including Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the Syrian National Army, opened military operations against the former government of Bashar al-Assad. Seeking safety from SNA factions seizing territory throughout Aleppo, the Aleppo Governorate, more than 100,000 people fled to areas governed by the Kurdish-led Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria. The situation is exacerbating an acute and long-standing crisis with overcrowded camps and severely damaged infrastructure and a lack of water, power, healthcare, food, and weather-appropriate shelter. Khazna Ismail, a displaced Kurdish woman, described the scenes unfolding on the ground. Women and children walked barefoot to save their lives. Pregnant women walked without food and water. They want to destroy us, but we defended ourselves. We were about to die in the cold and hunger for 2 days, but we still resisted and reached our own areas. We came by trucks and buses. Some came on foot. To discuss these latest developments, I spoke earlier today to journalist Seamus Malakavzali. I began by asking him what the future might look like for Syria.
The Syrian Salvation Government, which is the parallel government that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham leads, which was in power in Idlib, is the government that is going to be installed firmly in Damascus. There doesn't seem to be any real changes ministerially. Doesn't seem to be any real changes, I guess, ideologically from the pragmatism that they were advocating before. But they are only supposed to be in power until 2025, at which point the Syrian constitution is supposed to be changed. The idea that this was going to be more of an inclusive process, that being something that welcomes in more democratic or more, I guess, slightly left-leaning powers, that isn't happening, or doesn't seem to be happening, at least at this time.
And 14 years of civil war and aggressive sanctions have clearly brought the Syrian economy to its knees. So in that context, how should we interpret the HTS's latest announcement that they will try and resolve this through essentially neoliberalizing Syria's economy, through shifting towards a free market-based economy?
Why they're doing this, it's part of a larger strategy to integrate themselves in the world by seeming more liberal than they actually are. I'm sure if you were to talk to, Sharia law experts within HTS, they would, of course, lead with talking about Islamic banking, about the illegality of things like interest. But that is not something that is going to endear yourself to Western authorities who you need to build up your country again, or at the very least, people who are closer to the West. I mean, not specifically America. So channeling that you are in favor of neoliberal economics, that you will be friendly to business, that you will be friendly to minorities if you're concerned about PR, that you will be protective of these people that otherwise would have been perhaps brutalized or executed under a different Islamist regime. That's all part of that grand strategy. Whether any of this will come to pass, that remains to be seen, though.
And if we think about in sort of the traditional, historically, when it comes to post-conflict or post-war reconstruction that has very much focused on a free market approach, a neoliberal approach, what do you think we can expect the consequences of this announcement to be for ordinary citizens about what reconstructing and rebuilding according to a neoliberal, Western outlook? What can we expect that will look like?
You're facing down, I think, two very, very bad options. One of which has already happened before, which is Assad Syria attempted to reconstruct a lot of the country that had been affected by this war under the guise of extreme American sanctions. And it was a very slow process, created a very brittle economy, and there was a great atmosphere of malaise and depression about where the country was heading. There wasn't really a future there, economically speaking. But here, under what HTS seems to be proposing, there may be greater economic growth. Turkey, I'm sure, would love to get in on this. Saudi Arabia, I'm sure, would love to get in on this. But you're essentially staring down the barrel of, more privatization, the creation of deeply parasitical reconstructive organizations. Things that, like, as you were saying, things that have afflicted previous conflict zones before. This kind of shock therapy went very poorly in Iraq. And if it is implemented here, it is going to, I think, fare very poorly for ordinary people in Syria, even if the numbers by which we typically associate economic growth go up.
I guess what has really struck me over the past few days is the speed with which many of these pieces are falling into place. Even though Assad's toppling, for many of us, seemed to come out of nowhere, we have this like immediate move to say, you know, we're protecting private property, we're neoliberalizing the economy, the involvement of these global actors in that process. We also have states like the UK recognizing organizations that just last week they had prescribed as terrorist organizations. So how should we interpret the pace at which these maneuvers are taking place?
I think they want this Syria issue, quote unquote, solved as soon as possible. Do they like HTS ideologically? Not really, but it is useful to them, even if they are not the preferred people who took power. I mean, as you've seen in Germany, in other places in Europe, they've immediately stopped processing asylum applications for Syrian refugees, even though the specter of war still very much reigns over the entire thing, even if the threat of persecution by the government of Assad no longer remains. You know, if they can just move in their pieces as quickly as they can, then maybe they can get some sort of controlling stake, and then maybe they can get this off their plate finally. They don't have to care about this. That's I think what this is mostly about. They want something at least partially friendly to their interests, but more importantly, something that takes the refugees out of there and takes this matter away from them specifically.
Other than having an excuse to return refugees or to stop processing refugees from Syria, what are those other interests that these governments might be hoping that HTS secure?
The primary thing that comes to mind right now are the supply lines to Hezbollah and the supply lines to groups that oppose Israel and oppose American global interests. I mean, Assad was never a particularly strong link to the axis of resistance and to other groups like it, but they were the line that connected, you know, Iran and Iraq to Lebanon and to other places. That's why Hezbollah intervened. That's why its fall was such a sudden and, I think, is going to be quite a devastating blow. And maintaining a state, a government that is not going to keep those supply lines open. And at the moment, does not seem terribly concerned by the fact that Israel is invading its own territory. Again, even if it's not ideologically great, even if you don't want to deal with Jolani, you'd prefer with someone else, this is absolutely a benefit to you. You want this kept up as long as possible, because as long as these people are in power in Damascus, there is not going to be very much of a defense against whatever Israel wants to do.
Now, Western media has obviously flocked to Syria. We've seen so much reporting on the rebels taking over Assad's mansion, distant gunfire, and of course, you know, genuinely moving scenes of thousands of prisoners being freed from the Sednaya torture center outside Damascus. But I just wanted to play you a clip, Seamus. It's from CNN. And it shows foreign correspondent Clarissa Ward discovering an overlooked prisoner in Sednaya.
I can't tell though, it might just be a blanket, but it's the only cell that's locked. Is he gonna shoot it?
The guard makes us turn the camera off while he shoots the lock off the cell door. We go in to get a closer look. It's still not clear if there is something under the blanket.
Oh, it moved. Is there someone there? I thought I saw it move. Is someone there? Or is it just a blanket? I don't know.
I think it's someone. Hello?
okay, it's just moving.
I'm a civilian, he says. I'm a civilian. He tells the fighter he's from the city of Homs and has been in the cell for 3 months.
Okay, you're okay. You're okay. You're okay. You're okay.
He clutches my arm tightly with both hands.
Okay. Does anyone have any water? Water. My. Okay, it's water. It's water. Okay. Okay. Okay, you're okay. You're okay. You're okay.
Now, Syrians have been scouring Sednaya for days, and yet Clarissa Ward seems to have just kind of wandered in and, stumbled across a prisoner that they somehow missed through an open prison door. And that's led to some online to call this scene staged. What are your thoughts on this video? Like, whether or not it's legit or not, or staged or not, what is the purpose of like a clip like this? What do you make of it? It's a very eerie, very strange clip, and I was just wondering what your thoughts were on it.
No, I mean, there's a wealth of videos of real people who have been released from Sednaya, parents with children in these cells, real exhilaration of being released. But HTS has been kind of uniquely media savvy over the past few years, and especially the past few days, understanding the importance of giving interviews to networks that Americans watch, like CNN. Jolani had been interviewed by CNN just a few days earlier. I think they knew that even if CNN were to play these videos, that it would be more evocative to an American audience if an American reporter were to witness this personally. But since this process has already happened, I guess, admittedly, it is speculation. But with all of the circumstances present in this video, it really feels like they constructed this for the cameras so that American audiences can feel what other people were feeling. But people had skepticism of the interviews with Jolani, where he was expressing that his phase with ISIS was, an effect of being young. People had skepticism about that, and I think it's creating skepticism here, and it's baffling. This may work on certain people. I'm sure it will, but it adds fuel to the fire of conspiracies about the prison abuses that were happening under Assad being exaggerated, that all of this is for show, that it's all manufactured. It helps nothing, really. It's a very strange thing.
That was Seamus Malakavzali speaking to me earlier today. It's funny how coming out in favor of free market economics gets you quite quickly delisted as a terrorist organization. Just an observation. A new study has found that 96% of children in Gaza feel death is imminent. The report, carried out by the Community Training Center for Crisis Management, an organization based in Gaza, reveals the unimaginable psychological toll that witnessing a genocide is having on children in the region. Over 60% of the children surveyed had direct experience of a traumatic event, and nearly 50% of caregivers said children in their care believed they would die in the war. Describing the impact of this trauma, the report noted the following widespread symptoms emerging amongst Gaza's children. As a result of such exposure to trauma, children develop responses that may persist long after the war has ceased, profoundly affecting their daily lives. Traumatic responses can manifest in various ways, including ongoing emotional distress, anxiety, behavioral changes, difficulties in relationships, regression, nightmares, sleep disturbances, eating issues, and physical symptoms such as pain. Speaking about that report, Helen Patterson, Chief Executive of the War Child UK, said this. This report lays bare that Gaza is one of the most horrifying places in the world to be a child. Alongside the levelling of hospitals, schools, and homes, a trail of psychological destruction has caused wounds unseen, but no less destructive on children who hold no responsibility for this war. The symptoms Gaza's children are displaying are hardly surprising when you think about what they are having to endure. We can't show it to you, but Gazan journalist Hanin Meher Salem posted a deeply disturbing and heartbreaking video today. It shows a badly burned 4-year-old boy shivering in pain and shock, wrapped in bandages, and speaking faintly about the last thing he remembers. The caption to that video describes it like this. The bird, Dad, Mum. These are the only words uttered by the tongue of a lone child who survived death in a bombing that killed his entire family. His body was burned and he is no more than 4 years old, trapped in Beit Hanun with no hospitals or treatment to soothe the fire of his burns. He was displaced with others, passed from hand to hand until he reached the Baptist hospital, repeating the last thing he remembers before the missile struck. His father bringing him a bird and feeding it a pomelo. Then the missile obliterated his father, his bird, his innocent body, his dreams, and his life. Anyone who knows a 4-year-old child knows that when they experience even just the slightest pain or, shock, when they fall over, when they trip over, when their toy breaks or something, they feel overwhelmed by emotion and they want to run to their nearest caregiver who they trust, who loves them, for comfort. And those moments, we know from child therapy that those moments of being held in the wake of pain, whether emotional or physical, are absolutely integral to how that child is going to process trauma and pain as an adult. And so to think about a child witnessing something as catastrophic as his family being obliterated by a missile and then having no one that they know to turn to, I mean, it's unimaginable what kind of psychological impact that's going to have in the long term that the people of Gaza are expected to recover from and to emerge from unscathed. The horror of Israel's ongoing and seemingly endless assault on Gaza is being felt in other ways too. It's now winter in the enclave, meaning it's often cold and wet. Louise Wateridge of UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinians, told the BBC this about the conditions that Palestinians are living under.
Yeah, really not a lot has changed here. Not a lot has improved. The last 24 hours have been as deadly as ever. We're seeing people killed in strikes and bombs. There's been relentless tank shelling overnight. And it's just relentless. It really is just relentless. You have 2.2 million people here in the Gaza Strip. They are trapped. They still cannot exit. They still cannot leave. And day in, day out, we're just facing relentless bombardments and people really don't know what to do, where to go. People are just exhausted. They continue to be exhausted.
And Louise, in terms of some of the basics, what are people eating?
Flour, bread, very, very basic. Lentils. That's about it. That's about all we're seeing. I've been in and around UNRWA shelters the last few days and people need everything. They really are so desperate. You have mothers asking for milk for their babies. Their babies are very malnourished. They don't have sanitary items for women. The food, children are crying in the corner because they don't have a piece of bread. The United Nations was able to get 100 trucks of flour and food in yesterday. It went straight out to the community. UNRWA was responsible for the entire distribution. But that's for today. That's 200,000 people with food. What about tomorrow? What about the next day? We need continued aid coming in. The winter is here. We're in December. People continue to need everything and ask for everything.
Given the bombardment continues, Louise, that of course also means people who are being killed and injured. What about the situation with any of the operational medical facilities?
Yeah, I spoke to some doctors at Nasser Hospital a few days ago and they're just beside themselves. They speak about the strikes and the bombs being so fierce and relentless. People are now sheltering in tents. They have much less protection than they did a year ago when they were in buildings. They're telling me that bodies are completely evaporating, and they're not even finding remains of people anymore after these strikes because there is no protection for them at all. And on top of that, there is now the repercussions of 14 months of lack of medical care, lack of long-term, cancer treatments, diabetes treatments, all these kind of treatable illnesses. They are no longer able to treat. And the doctors just are absolutely beside themselves because not only are people being killed in the bombs and the strike, they're now also watching them die from illnesses that would normally be able to be treated, but they don't have the they don't have the medication, they don't have the medical care.
Bodies evaporated by the blasts, leaving no remains to be found. I mean, just when you think the sentences that were made to say and hear about what Israel is doing to Palestinians in Gaza couldn't get any worse, a new depth of atrocity is revealed. I mean, Stephen, even if this war ended tomorrow, how on earth can a community heal from this?
I mean, first of all, unfortunately, the war isn't going to end tomorrow. I wish it would. And how does a community heal? Well, it doesn't, not for a very, very long time. Children especially are so vulnerable to the trauma that's being inflicted on them at the moment. And, you talk about that 4-year-old little boy covered in bandages, burned all over his body. That's a quarter of his life at least that he's now spent under those conditions. Most of his memories before that would have been erased by the horrors that he's had not only to see, but now to endure as well. I mean, I was going to tell you the story, Dalia. Last year at Christmas, Gary McQuiggan, our producer, and I did a video that we put out at Christmas time, which used footage from Gaza given to us by a Palestinian journalist. And it showed the children of Gaza who had moved to Rafah being entertained by children's entertainers. They'd set up like a camp. They were doing little shows for the kids. And the children were laughing and sort of, enjoying it. And I can tell you that is not going to be happening this year. The situation at this point is so much worse. Everybody just about is displaced from the north. There's no infrastructure, very little in the way of nutrition, almost no medical care. It's cold, it's wet. And people, I guess, are broken. And one thing we know about Palestinians is that they're incredibly strong. They're incredibly resilient. They've been, fighting against Israel for 3/4 of a century, if not longer. But what we're seeing today, this genocide, is the greatest threat to their existence that we've seen so far. And that is something that is very, very difficult to recover from. And it's something that our government is supporting and giving cover to. Our government is supporting and giving cover to the burning of that little boy, to the 96% of Palestinian children who expect to die at any moment. Not only our government, European governments and the US government more than any. Just this week, we saw the former Israeli Defense Secretary, Yoav Gallant, in the White House, a man who is wanted by the ICC on war crimes. The week before, we saw Mrs. Benjamin Netanyahu having dinner with Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago. What these things indicate, the way that our government continues to cover this war, the way that the US continues to provide cover and military support for the war, is that really the people in Palestine do not matter. They don't matter to our governments and they don't matter to various other Western governments. And in fact, the sad fact is they actually don't matter to the governments of many Arab states. I mean, they have populations that care about Palestinians, but the states themselves are much more interested in aligning with the West than they are in standing up for Palestine and Palestinians against Israel's onslaught. And so it's only us that can make sure that Palestinians know that they matter and make our governments know that they matter to us. And if we don't stand up for Palestinians and do the best that we can to stop this onslaught, then when we don't matter to our governments or some other governments, who's going to stand up for us?
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, to juxtapose as well the doubling down on legitimization from our government, from the US government, even as we know in such granular detail what is happening on the ground. And I think that this psychological element, this kind of trauma element is so important because I think that the way that the Israeli state is viewing this is that this is the last war. You know, this, I don't want to call it conflict, but kind of this, the existence of the Palestinians has been a thorn in the side of Israel since it began, since the state of Israel began. And, you know, there's been this constant kind of like, you know, upsurges in war or intensifications of conflict, changing dynamics, etc., that Israel has had to grapple with. And as far as they're concerned, this is the last war that they are going to fight. And what they mean by that, I think, is that, look, we are going to not only kill as many Palestinians as we possibly can, displace as many Palestinians out of their land as possible, but the ones that remain, we're going to break them so much that we want to create a situation where they can't build a society afterwards because of that mass psychological break. And as a result of that, we will never have to deal with this question again. And yes, you know, what we're doing is atrocious. And yes, what we're doing is making us into a pariah state. But they're relying on the fact that much like, you know, the United States did with the Native Americans, with Indigenous Americans, it will be bad for a while, but in 10, 15 years, people will forget and we will have fought the last war. We're going to, you know, that's the kind of increasing what I'm understanding their strategy to be, because there's no like immediately achievable military goal here. You know, there's no kind of target. There's no sense of, okay, when we get to this point, then we can declare that the mission is accomplished and we can leave. It's a sense of breaking as much as we can so that the Palestinians cannot rebuild, so that we don't have to fight this situation again. And given that mentality, it's terrifying that our governments are paving the way for that, paving the way and facilitating the elimination of a people, whether physically or psychologically. And at the same time, it's incumbent upon all of us to not only do everything that we can to stop the genocide happening now, but also the day after this war ends, to make sure that as a global community, we do not lose sight of the fact that we have to make sure that the reconstruction that takes place in the Strip is not done by parasitic, you know, new neoliberal restructuring, but is about actually enabling the Palestinians to rebuild their own society, because that is exactly what this kind of mass trauma that the Israelis are visiting upon Palestinians, particularly upon children, because those children are the ones who are going to grow up to be part of Palestinian society and to be part of that rebuilding process. We have to do what we can to make sure that that rebuilding process is in their hands and is possible, because robbing Palestinians of their future is the military goal here. There is no traditional military kind of strategy here. The goal is to rob Palestinians of their future by breaking their spirit in this moment, and particularly by creating a kind of damage that is going to be felt by generations to come. And so I think that is also what our responsibility is as, you know, a global community of people of conscience. Right. On to our next story, a bit of a shift in tone, but let's go. The aliens are coming, and not a moment too soon. Maybe they will save us. At least that's what some New Jersey residents are theorizing after many, many sightings of strange flying objects in the nighttime sky over the small East Coast U.S. state.
Across New Jersey, the sense of unease is growing.
It's wild, honestly. Every single day there's more conspiracy theories.
Olivia DiMatteo is a businesswoman in Morris County who says the drone sightings have been happening for weeks. Have you seen them yourself?
I have. They are out every single night in Mendham. You can look out your window and see anywhere between 4 to 8 of them.
Some of the devices, she claims, are the size of small cars.
Now, I'm not a drone fanatic, but the size of small cars seems kind of impossible. But as that CBS reporter said, that's how they're being described. Though some US lawmakers, of course, as US lawmakers love to do, they have even more outlandish theories than extraterrestrials. This was US Congressman Jefferson Van Drew on Fox News.
Objects in the sky that are the size of an SUV over any city, over any state, it's an invasion of our airspace. In focus now, Republican Congressman Jeff Van Drew of New Jersey, member of the House Judiciary Committee on the Hill right now. How do you address this at this point?
Well, here's the real deal, Harris. You know, I'm also on the Transportation Committee, on the Aviation Subcommittee, and I've gotten to know people. And from very high sources, very qualified sources, very responsible sources, I'm going to tell you the real deal. Iran launched a mothership probably about a month ago that contains these drones. That mothership is off, I'm going to tell you the deal. It's off the east coast of the United States of America. They've launched drones, is everything that we can see or hear. And again, these are from high sources. I don't say this lightly. Now, you know, we know there was a probability it could have been our own government. We know it's not our own government because they would have let us know. It could have been some really glorified hobbyist or hobbyists that were doing something unbelievable. They don't have the technology. But let's pretend that's possible. The third possibility was somebody, an adversarial country, doing this. Know that Iran made a deal with China to purchase drones, motherships, and technology in order to go forward. The sources I have are good. They can't reveal who they are because they are speaking to me in confidentiality. These drones should be shot down. Whether it was some crazy hobbyist that we can't imagine, or whether it is Iran, and I think it very possibly could be, they should be shot down. We are not getting the full deal, and the military is on alert with this.
Fox News has this irresistible obsession with declaring that the US is under invasion, like whatever happens. Concern over the drones has made it all the way, however, to the Pentagon. This is the Pentagon's spokesperson responding to the Iranian mothership theory.
Jen. Sabrina, can you tell me what the Pentagon is doing to address this issue of drone sightings over New Jersey? It's near sensitive installations. The FBI is involved. What is the Pentagon doing?
Sure. So at this time, aware of those drone sightings that have been reported, at this time, we have no evidence that these activities are coming from a foreign entity or the work of an adversary. We're going to continue to monitor what is happening, but, at no point were our installations threatened when this activity was occurring.
Can you rule out that these are American drones or U.S. military drones?
These are not U.S. military drones. Again, this is being investigated by local law enforcement. What our initial assessment here is that these are not drones or activities coming from a foreign entity or adversary.
Representative Jeff Van Drew, who is a Republican from New Jersey, was just on the air saying that Iran launched a mothership probably about a month ago that contains these drones, and that mothership is off the coast of the east coast of the United States. Is there any truth to that?
There is not any truth to that. There is no Iranian ship off the coast of the United States, and there's no so-called mothership launching drones towards the United States.
Whatever the objects are, they have New Jersey officials worried and frustrated. This was New Jersey State Senator John Bremnick.
All of these drones should be grounded until we know where they're coming from and what their purpose is. The reason I call for a limited state of emergency is we do that in a snowstorm the day before the snow. Here's a situation where people are worried about drones flying over their houses, flying over military bases, and there seems to be no answer. So my concern is twofold. One, if the government doesn't know, that's pretty scary. And if they do know and there's no transparency, that might be worse.
Yeah. So, John, why did it take so many weeks even to get the governor's attention on this?
Well, I think that people at first thought it was a fluke, right? You know, you see a couple drones, you don't make a big deal of it, but then you see 50 drones coming from the ocean area. And then people say, wait a minute now, this is no joke. And if this is done by a foreign country or done by private citizens, we need to engage that immediately. So I think at first people thought it was either a joke or not of very importance. And now the FBI seems not to have any answers.
Senator,
so
you
that's
don't
why
believe
we're having a meeting today at 10 o'clock at the Rock.
You don't believe there's no answers? I mean, all they have to do is follow a drone to see where it lands.
Well, all I can tell you is if the federal government doesn't have an answer, we should all be worried.
Yeah.
If our military has no clue what drones the size of cars are flying around New Jersey, I can tell you right now, if they're Martians in these drones, they're not staying in New Jersey because our taxes are so high. So you don't have to worry about any of these Martians living here. I can guarantee you that.
It's just a perfect New Jersey accent. I just love it. Another New Jersey lawmaker, Assemblywoman Dawn Fantasia, reported this from a police briefing on the drones. "We know nothing, period. To state that there is no known or credible threat is incredibly misleading, and I informed all officials of that sentiment. State authorities, including the NJSP, are shackled with what they are able to do. Any interception or takedown of any UAS is under the strict jurisdiction of the federal government. At this point, I believe military intervention is the only path forward. There will be no answers in the absence of proactivity. The US Coast Guard seems to be the most likely to intervene based upon our briefing, but even that component was shrouded in mystery." Fantasia also added this puzzling piece of information. She said, "Detection challenges. NJSP deployed helicopters over Raritan Bay, but could not detect drones, even with infrared cameras. Current radio frequencies do not pick up drone signals. Colonel Callahan expressed concerns about potential danger, leading to a halt in helicopter deployments." Again, the Americans, they just love to be scared all the time. Now, New Jersey isn't the only place that's reported drone sightings. They've also been reported in New York City and over the suburbs of Philadelphia. In late November, there were unexplained drone sightings over 4 UK air bases, all of which are also used by the US Air Force. That led to the deployment of 60 British troops to investigate the sightings, though we've not been told of the outcome of those investigations. Stephen, should we welcome our alien overlords in their SUVs?
Well, what I can tell you, Dalia, is that all I want for Christmas, all I want is the appearance of an intergalactic space daddy to come and sort us all out, like get us into line, because things really feel like they are falling apart. And I will say that, like, this is not Iran. There is no Iranian mothership. Iran has been crippled by sanctions by the West for the longest time. If they wanted a war with the US, if they wanted to provoke a war, and this would indeed be an incredibly provocative act to send swarms of car-sized drones over sensitive bases and so forth in the US and in the UK, if they wanted that war, they would have bombed the shit out of Israel on the 2 times that they had a chance to do it. And they didn't, because they don't want to provoke a bigger conflagration. But the US speakers there, the congressman, for example, was so keen on the idea of military intervention as soon as possible. Indeed, so was the Assemblywoman Dawn Fantasia, a great name, by the way. They're the ones who are really keen on the military getting involved and indeed raising the temperature over these objects. Of course, you know, they have every right to discover what they are, work it out. Probably when they do that, they'll find out that it is, in fact, the US military checking out new technology, trying out new drones that, you know, can move in new and interesting ways or can swarm. But this increasing move towards like a heated military environment is one that we've seen in other places as well. Like just today, NATO, for about, I don't know, the 5th time in 5 months, along with various other generals and so forth, have said that that we need to get ourselves on a military footing. You know, someone is preparing for war here. Someone, in fact, probably wants a war here. And it certainly isn't Iran, it's the West. The West is the one that is acting provocatively. The West is the one which is, as it were, preparing a population for the possibility of military combat of a larger scale. So yeah, if this turned out to be, well, I wouldn't be surprised if this turned out to be military operations by the US. No surprise that they turned up over RAF bases where the US Air Force operates as well. I mean, the other option is it is just kind of, I don't know, a tech firm trying things out. But I suspect that the US military is behind this. I wish it was the aliens.
Yeah, I mean, I just always think about kind of what the experience must be of watching Fox News, of being like a regular viewer of Fox News and just for hours a day, just being constantly told, like, be afraid, be scared, things things are happening, like shit's going down, like there's an invasion, there's like don't walk out your house, you're gonna get immediately robbed. Like it's like the effect of this like constant sense of fear, and yet fear that's not actually based in the reality of things that aren't actually happening that we actually should be afraid of. Things like climate breakdown, or things like the fact that basic human rights law is being shredded before our very eyes, that we're watching like a population get exterminated before our very eyes and no one seems to be able to do anything about it. But they never focus on those kinds of things. And yet they just create this political subjectivity that is so insular and based in like paranoia. It's like it seems to be, that is the tone of Fox News constantly. Like I'm sure that the Fox News editors were thrilled when they could have like this SUV alien / Iran story, because it's got every ingredient that they want for like a perfect Fox News story. Paranoia inducing, delusional, and not based in any of the actual like serious issues that we should be focusing on, that Fox News would do anything that they can to distract everyday people from. And as you said, chances are when we do find out what this is, it is much more likely to be either some company testing out some technology, or the US or one of its allies, as you said, like ramping up for war. I mean, again, that's something that's actually like we should really be worried about. Like we should be worried about NATO coming out and saying we all need to prepare for war, given that, every global superpower is armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. But that's not actually, but talking about those details and what we can actually do to deal with that situation, such as, like nuclear disarmament, that's never on the table. It's always just be scared of like things that go boo in the night, basically. A man who can see through all of that noise and, understand what really is going on, Luigi Mangione. So Luigi Mangione stands accused of the murder of United Healthcare boss Brian Thompson. But rather than condemn the killing, the public, at least large parts of it, seem to be saving their sympathy for the killer, with many people from across the political spectrum using this line of reasoning. I do believe he killed one person, but the CEO has corporately killed thousands. Now, that was a message received by one of our colleagues from her Lib Dem voting mum. So the way people, including, very centrist, very moderate so-called people, are understanding these events have spread far and wide in the US. That's understandable. Mangione's actions appear to have tapped into a groundswell of anger directed at health insurance corporations. After all, 60% of American adults experience problems using their insurance, including denial of coverage for procedures, as well as failing to get reimbursements after care. But private health insurance ripoffs doesn't explain the phenomenon in other countries like the UK, where only a relatively small number of people use it. What does explain it, though, is an intuitive understanding of how corporations work and how their bosses and shareholders enrich themselves on our misery. While we were struggling through the cost of living crisis, corporations boosted their profits, making our lives harder, raking in record bottom lines. Corporations are also increasingly large landlords in the UK, raising rents, swallowing up residential properties at higher than ever prices, and presenting tenants with a faceless landlord, all again for shareholder value. And corporations are destroying our planet, stealing the air we breathe and the environments we inhabit, and charging us for the pleasure of doing so. Just 57 companies are responsible for 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. And in the 7 years since the Paris Accords, many have increased their fossil fuel use. Of course, the American private industry is uniquely homicidal, but people do understand how corporate greed works and how it only ever grows. Corporations are parasites. They extract off us constantly. They take and take and take until there's no more left to take. And they hand it to their bosses and their shareholders. And most people really get this. But there's a small constituency who just can't wrap their head around all this anti-corporate sentiment. You guessed it, it's the wealthy and their advocates, including an insulated media class who seem completely baffled by the public's outpouring of understanding for the killer of a CEO. This was an exchange on Luigi Mangione's on Luigi Mangione between Brianna Joy Gray and Piers Morgan on a recent episode of his YouTube show.
It looks to me like he's a bit of a narcissist.
What do you mean?
I think he was a narcissist. I think that he was clearly unhinged. I'm not sure that he's the great Robin Hood. Hang on.
Which guy? I'm sorry.
Hang on.
You're talking about
Luigi, the shooter,
or,
right?
Brian Thompson.
The one who shot Brian Thompson, Luigi, right? I'm just not sure that he's this great, heroic guy standing up against the healthcare system. I suspect
I'm not talking about that. This isn't about Luigi, who may or may not, he's been arrested, he's been charged. We may or may not know that he's the actual shooter. I'm talking about the public reaction to Brian Thompson's death.
No, I understand
and we
that.
do know about Brian Thompson.
I understand that.
We know about United Healthcare, and that's the root of the discontent. That's the root of the public outcry. Luigi is just a vessel through which people are expressing their deep frustrations with the American healthcare system. So the question is, if you don't want murders like this to be happening, assassinations to be happening like this in the street, and I'm someone who does not believe in the death penalty and don't condone these kinds of vigilante instances of violence in either case. But if you want to get to the root of why people are so deeply unhappy, you have to, it resonates so deeply with people that this has happened, you have to get to the root of why there is this deep well of tragedy, despair, and outrage in the United States of America. And that has to do with what Brian Thompson has chosen to do with his life, and what companies like United Healthcare have chosen to do to the American people.
But just to be clear, before I go to Natalie to respond to that, do you feel any empathy for Brian Thompson and his family?
I have infinite empathy for any individual as a person in their personal capacity. As his role as the CEO of United Healthcare, I'm afraid I'm with the overwhelming majority, bipartisan majority of the American people who say, I'm saving my empathy for people who are much more vulnerable and have caused a lot less harm.
Right, so to be clear, you don't have any empathy for him after he was executed?
I personally don't.
Right. Okay. Well, at least you're honest. I mean, I find this staggering. You've got to remember, the left is supposed to be the party that cares so much. All of them have their Be Kind hashtags. They're the caring ones, the kind ones. And they can't even bring it in their hearts to say they find a shred of empathy for a man who's just been executed, who's the father of children, the husband of a loving wife, and so on. I find that just staggering, that you can't, on a human level, have empathy for the murder of someone, but also make your point about the system in which he was an executive.
Now, one of the most striking things about the Mangione case is that it actually isn't a left-right thing. He isn't a leftist, and he appeared to quite like Silicon Valley tech bros. There are also plenty of people on the left, pacifists, for example, but others too, who would decry the killing. But many of the masses of people who are on the sharp edge of corporate greed every day are finding it hard to mourn the loss of an example of someone profiting from their misery. Someone else who got that wrong was conservative shock jock and reported multimillionaire Ben Shapiro. On a recent episode of his podcast entitled The Evil Revolutionary Left, Cheers Murder, Shapiro gave this explanation for the public reaction to Mangione.
Violence against members of private industry, that isn't even a protest of public policy. Let's be fair about this. That isn't even shooting politicians, which would be evil enough. It's even a different level of evil because it's a protest against the very system of free markets themselves. Brian Thompson isn't responsible for America's healthcare system any more than the head of CVS is responsible for America's trade system. Directing hatred against Brian Thompson is not about shaping public policy, because you could shoot every CEO in America and it wouldn't shape public policy. It turns out that it's about trying to threaten anyone who engages in free markets at all. This is simply Marxist, leftist, radical evil.
He really overestimates the organic love that people have for free market economies. It's just taken for granted that, of course, people would be horrified at the idea of taking a shot against a free market economy when, actually a lot of polling shows that when you actually ask people the nuts and bolts, whether they agree with, the nuts and bolts of free market economics, a lot of the time people are like, actually no, and also it's not really a free market. Well, Shapiro's viewers didn't agree with that, with the assessment that he had. I'm actually going to read you some of their comments. This one had 14,000 likes. He says, "You're wrong, Ben. I'm that evil leftist you always rage about. I have an uncle who is as conservative as they come, voted for Trump and everything. We have very little in common and avoid each other at holiday parties. I can tell you we both wept when my dad slowly died of cancer while the insurance he paid for kept denying him life-saving care. We both saw the injustice in that. That same uncle is posting on Facebook right now how he couldn't give a fuck about no CEO. Insurance companies kill millions of people a year, and they don't discriminate between leftists and conservatives. This one also had 14,000 likes. Fact, both left and right are cheering. We don't care about your feelings. And this commenter with 6,000 likes displayed a savvy understanding of how division profits the dividers. Your business model requires us normal people to hate each other. Read the room, Ben. But it isn't just right-wing media that doesn't get public feeling in this case. Mainstream liberal media is panicking too.
The reaction online is also just such a reinforcement of how much aesthetics, attractiveness, like the shallowness of the American people, the American people who are online, we'll say, is very much on display here. Yes, there's absolutely a bubbling anger about the inequity in the country writ large and in the healthcare system, no question. But so much of the clips we were watching at the top of this segment are driven by the fact that this is an attractive.
We got to drop the banner to show why.
And it is deeply troubling that we are celebrating this person who's committed cold-blooded murder because he clearly went to the gym.
I mean, America, Europe celebrate cold-blooded murderers all the time. And I'm not going to deny that the public, I am the public, have been pretty thirsty over Mangione. But trying to discount the public's genuine anti-corporate rage as them just having their head turned by a set of pecs is just another example of the kind of infantilizing, dismissive, and anti-political behavior that mainstream liberal media has come to exemplify. Stephen, this kind of anti-corporate sentiment, it cuts across so many different demographics, it cuts across political persuasions. Is this something that we can build something out of?
I think it is absolutely something that we can build something out of. And I'll tell you why. It's very useful, I think, to think about oneself from the point of view of a corporation. What am I to a corporation? Well, I'm nothing except a vehicle for extraction. First is the extraction of my labor and the value that's attached to it by the corporation, which is greater than the value I'm given for it, of course. Then there's all the things that I can buy or that I have to pay for that can be costed at higher and higher costs. And you'd think that the logic of capitalism, of corporate capitalism, would be don't kill the organisms that you're extracting all this value from. Except capitalism has no logic and it is killing us. The epitome case is the American private health insurance case where, it happily kills its patients. It denies them treatment, it takes the money, and then it doesn't give them what would keep them going on for longer in order to give them more money. But as you pointed out in that piece, the environment is another way in which corporate greed is killing us. And I think people do understand that. They do understand when they are squeezed too far. Even if they don't have a theory of why it is, they do understand that actually the squeeze is too tight, you can't breathe, you can't go on, you have nothing left at the end of the month, and you're not getting anything in return. And I think what they also realize is that our politicians are not going to protect us from this. Whether you are a Labour voter or a Conservative voter, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you know that when it comes to corporations, which are extra political, they're international, they have incredible power, some of them greater power than many states, you know that neither of those parties are going to do anything to defend you from them. Our own Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has been sucking up to BlackRock recently, which is, an asset-grabbing corporation, very, very interested in the assets that Britain has that we, the people, have paid into over lifetimes. So, I think there is a broad understanding that corporations are not good for you. In fact, they want to kill you, or they are killing you, and that our politicians, no matter where they stand on the political spectrum, are not going to protect us from them. And that's why people are sort of supportive or refusing to condemn Mangione's actions, because they're in a position where they think, well, what other actions are there to take against corporate power if the people that we vote into power aren't going to use the power that we give them via elections to protect us? Now, on the left-right divide, and as we've seen, that's understood by people no matter how they vote. Working class people, lower middle class people across the political divide understand that life is getting worse for them. as corporations grow richer and richer. Now, of course, how you theorize that is a matter of whether you're on the left or you're on the right. From my own point of view, I feel like the left has done decades, centuries even, of work on capitalism. But you only have to look at two books that came out in the earliest 20th century, which talk explicitly about how corporations impinge on our lives, suck us dry domestically, and how they also take advantage of geopolitical disaster in order to enrich themselves as well. And those are both books by Naomi Klein. No Logo in the early 2000s, a little bit later, The Shock Doctrine. So that's, I guess, where I would theorize this from. But it's perfectly legitimate to just think, oh, I'm being ripped off. My paycheck doesn't go as far as it does. I've had to watch in the case of private health insurance, I've had to watch a family member die. In the case of the cost of living, I can't afford groceries anymore. My rent is spiraling out of control. Utilities are overpriced, and I see newspaper headlines telling me that the bottom lines of these companies just get fatter and fatter as I get thinner and thinner. So that disquiet, that anger, that sense of being ripped off, being taken for granted, being treated like an idiot by corporate capital, that really is the basis, I think, for a broad movement against corporatism, a broad movement that can influence politics, that can lead politicians in the direction that broad movement wants to move in, and that can eventually tackle corporate greed, restrict it in some way. Because, at the moment, we are heading towards a Blade Runner situation where elites are living in the sky and we're living in the dirt. And I think that is what people know in their hearts.
Yeah, I think that identifying anti-corporate sentiment as a thread through the political consciousness that people are developing, either as a sort of ideological framework of, socialism or whatever, or just as a keenly felt awareness that they experience on a daily basis is going to be core to any radical politics moving forward, for any progressive movement, for any leftist movement that's going to be successful and to gain a broad-based coalition. Because I really think that this sense of, people feel a sense that like everything that is important to us as human beings, how we eat, how we live together, how we communicate with one another, how we entertain ourselves, how we do everything, how our environment is shaped, is being made worse by corporate power. It's being cannibalized by corporate power. And for so long, particularly, in the 90s and in the early noughties, there's been this propaganda attempt to rename corporates as, wealth creators or job creators and all of these kinds of things. And that just is so out of touch with how everyday people experience corporate influence in their life, how the corporatization of the environment, corporatization of housing, of food, of all of these things. And I think the fact that people are responding to this with this sense of, yes, something has to change, tells me that the imagination that things can be different and the ways in which, the elites have tried to sell free market corporate capitalism as an inevitable, as a natural state of affairs, as, an unmovable state of affairs, that despite that being a really concerted propaganda campaign for years, that has actually not succeeded. And people do have a keen sense of there's actually a different way of organizing this that's not centered around the shareholders of a couple of corporations. But, I think there is a lot of potential there. And I don't think that we could have even predicted that this would be the response. And obviously, the fact that he's good looking or whatever, it kind of adds to like the memeability of the whole thing. But on a fundamental level, I don't think you could find a single person in the US who would say corporate healthcare worked for me. I remember one thing I remember seeing a while ago was an invoice, an itemized invoice from a woman who had given birth in an American hospital. And they had charged her for skin-to-skin contact. Like they had charged her for the act of being able to put her baby on her body and have skin-to-skin contact right after it was born. Like that was a commodified act. I mean, I don't think anyone in their right mind, no one other than someone who directly makes profit from that state of affairs, thinks that that is a sane way to organize society. There's just no way. And I think if we can, and the anti-globalization movements, which Naomi Klein's work did really influence and emerge out of, really had a good go at trying to create a politics around that. And maybe now it's time to kind of bring some of that back, because maybe now corporatization has, people have seen enough of corporatization that those arguments could really resonate quite strongly. Anyway, thank you so much, Stephen, for joining me on Novara Live tonight.
Thanks very much, Dalia. It's been a fascinating show. Yeah,
we've been all over the place. We've been in UFOs. We've been, on the streets of New Jersey. It's been all over. But thank you, Thank you, everyone, for watching tonight. And make sure you come back tomorrow for another show from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.